Hi, um, I'm happy to welcome you back to my channel. We are still in our chapter 3. In the last chapter, which was chapter 3a, the previous chapter, we talked about conditional statements, right? We divided our control flow statements into four parts. The first one is our conditional statement. The second one is our looping statement. The third one is our jumping or jump statement. And then the fourth one is our exception handling statement. And in the previous chapter, we talked at length about the conditional statements where we talked about the if, the else if, the switch, and the case statements. We also got to know that the switch and case statement is more like a particular case or a special case of an if and else statement. If you have not watched the previous videos, I mean, if this is the first video you are watching, I implore you to take some time, go over to the previous videos. I mean, this current video is chapter 3b. We've done chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3a. So this is chapter 3b. It is going to be okay if you can spare some of your time to go over the previous videos, get to know what we are doing there and what we said there. And I mean, we talked at length about a whole stuff. So it's not really something you would want to miss. Take out your time, go over the previous videos, get to see what we've done so that you can be able to, catch up with us and all of that. So in this chapter, we are going to be jumping fully into our looping statement. So what I'm just going to do is that I'm going to comment out this guy. To comment this guy, I'll first of all highlight everything I want to comment. Then I'll hold down my control key because I am on Windows. If I was on Mac, I will hold down my command key, right? And then I will push on my / and it gets everything coming. I mean, we've talked about comments at length in chapter 1. That's why I say if this is the first video you're watching, you might just have to take your time to go over the previous videos. And to push this guy down, you can see this line that is blinking. Just put it at that top, and then I'll keep hitting on enter and it keeps pushing it down. Up here, I'm just going to write out what we are going to be discussing in this chapter. So let me just put up a comment, and in uppercase letters, I'll just say looping statement. And inside the looping statements, we are going to be dealing with a for loop. The second one is a for in loop. The third one is a while loop. The fourth one is a do while loop. The fifth one is going to be a map method, where it's not really a loop this time around, even though it works on collections. And just as we are going to see in this particular chapter, it's a method actually, not a loop. Like it loops through items inside a collection. We are still going to see that in this chapter. So let's call it the map method. And then the last one, which is the sixth one, is going to be a for each method. So we are going to be talking about these 6 examples of our looping statement. So I'm just going to put my cursor here and push these guys down so that we can be able to start with our for loop. So basically, we are talking about control flow statements, right? Unlike conditional statements that allow us to execute a given line of code or a given block of code conditionally, that is, if a condition is true. So what looping statements do for us is that they allow us to execute a given line of code or a given block of code more than once. I mean, go over it again, and that is why we call it looping. It does it the first time, it can come the second time, it can come the third time, it can come the 1,000,000th time. That's that about the general overview of looping statements. So before we go over to discuss for loop, I mean, generally for all looping statements, there are a few stuffs I want us to touch. So there is what is called zero-based indexing in that. I'm just going to put it as a comment, zero-based indexing. I think it's available in basically all programming languages. So what this means is, for instance, if I have Emmanuel, David, John Doe, or let's say John, let's say Doe, Daniel. So as humans, when we count, we can say this is the first one, this is the second one, this is the third one, this is the fourth one, this is the fifth one. So we have 5 names here, right? The way we count it as humans is not the way that counts this guy, right? We as human beings, we start with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then that as a programming language is going to start with 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is what they call zero-based indexing. It's available in all programming languages. When we are talking about data types, we talked about the list data type. We are apparently going to use it in this chapter. Let me just give an example of what a list could look like. Let's say we want to put these names inside a list. So what I could just do is say final list of names is equal to, right? And then I put up my square brackets to denote an array. Some programming languages call it an array. Some programming languages call it list. In that, it is called a list. So inside this list, let me put up this string Emmanuel, and the next one is going to be David. The next one is going to be John. The next one is going to be Doe. So you see how I can use both single quotation marks and double quotation marks. The next one is do, and then the last one is Daniel. So this is an example of a list in that we already discussed what the final keyword does, and we said that this is the identifier for this data. This is a data, and this our data is a list where we are storing strings. Basically, the strings are what names of people. So when you have something like this, I'm just going to put a comment on top of it. So this is element 0, this is element 1, this is element 2, this is element 3, and this is the fourth one. This is how counting in most programming languages happens. It's zero base. The zero base just means that counting starts from 0. The first element or the first item will always have an index of 0. It is seen as the 0th element. Now that you know about zero-based indexing, I'm just going to delete it. So when we write our if statement, what we just do is, for instance, let me say final cool number is equal to 10, right? When we want to write our if statement, we can say something like if cool number is equal 10. We want to do something very simple. If this condition is true, any line of code that falls inside this block, we are going to execute it. I'm just going to comment this guy, and I'm going to bring it down. So the idea is the same when we want to write a for loop. So before we proceed, I want to tell you that a for loop is used when you know the number of times you want to execute a particular code or execute a particular block of code. For instance, let me say I want to print my name is Emmanuel. Well, let me just click on run. So you can see that my name is Emmanuel is just appearing once. Well, what if I want it to appear 4 times? And that's when I talk about a for loop. And how do we write for loops in that? First of all, I start with the keyword for, then I put up a bracket, and then I put up a block. Now inside this block, I'm going to put every single line of code that I want to be repeated. So I'm just going to cut this line 11, then I'll move it inside this block, because it is inside this block that I will put every single thing I want to be executed a given number of times. Unlike the if statement where we put up a condition that if it goes through, our block gets executed. Here in a for loop, we are going to do some kind of configurations. Remember, we want to print out this guy, let's say 5 times. We need to have where we are starting from, and we need to have an end. And you remember that a for loop is going to continue executing a given code as many times as possible. So we need to have a start, and we need to have a stop, and we need to be able to tell it, oh, if you get to this particular number, please, we don't want you to continue, we want you to stop. And how do we do it? First of all, we initialize our start. So let's say int count is equal to 0. We put our semicolon. The first statement we have written now is where we want to start. Now we are telling our for keyword, I want you to start with 0. And that start point, I'm storing it in a variable called count. What is going to be the condition that our for loop will check? If this condition continues to remain true, it will continue to print out these guys. But anytime it checks that condition and it goes false, it will not execute this block again. What is that condition? So we want to say that as long as our count is less than 5, because we want to print out this line 9 5 times, and we are starting from count 0. As long as our count is less than 5, so this is the condition that our for loop is going to be checking every single time it comes to execute this guy. You see that if you leave this guy like this, you are going to run into what we call an infinite loop. The reason is because what you just said is int count equal to 0, right? You are storing this 0 in a variable count, and you are providing a condition which says if count is less than 5, and count is 0. So 0 is always less than 5. So every time the for loop comes, it is going to see, oh, is 0 less than 5? Yes, 0 is less than 5. So it is going to continue printing out this my name is Emmanuel, and it runs into what is called an infinite loop. And we always want to avoid infinite loop. So in order to take care of an infinite loop, we need to find a way to be able to make sure that at some point this condition does not hold through again, so that our for loop will stop executing this block. In order to do that, what we could use is what we call the increment operator, and that increment operator is written like this. We say count plus plus. And for this last statement, you do not need to put up a semicolon, right? You can see that it is shouting at us and saying unexpected text. So before we proceed, we want us to talk talk about how this increment operator works. On line 6, we already have final cool number equal to 12. So what this increment operator does is that it grabs a number, then it increments that number by 1, and then it updates that number. So for instance, we could say cool number plus plus. It's not going to work because cool number is final. So we could just say in cool number equal to 12 and everything should be okay. Well, let me just see if I could print out cool number. Let's print cool number. I'm just going to comment this. You can see that cool number is now 13. What we are trying to achieve is this: int new number equal to cool number plus 1, and then we reassign the result to the initial value. So we now say that cool number now is equal to new number. So this line 7 and line 8 is what line 10 tries to achieve, but with a single line of code. So that is that about the increment operator. The same thing applies to the decrement operator, in which case you could just do minus minus. If we do cool number minus minus, is the same thing as saying cool number minus 1. We remove 1 from it and then we reassign the result. In fact, if I click on run, you could see that cool number is going to be 11. So let me comment this guy and then click on run. So you can see that our result is 11. So I'm just going to put down that I have talked about the increment and decrement operator in my notes. Fine, I'm just going to delete these guys because we don't need it, and then I will uncomment this guy. So what I'm just going to do is that I'm going to click on run so that we can see the result of our line 9 to line 11. So you can see that my name is Emmanuel is printed 5 times. So we want to know how this guy works to be able to give us this guy, right? First, we have a for keyword. So when that sees the for keyword, you say, okay, you want to execute a block of code a given number of times. Cool. Then we give it a starting point, which is just more like declaring our initial value, right? Where do we want it to start? We want it to start at 0, and we store this 0 in a count so that we can be able to use that particular initial point because we are going to keep updating it. Then it sees this particular statement and say, okay, you want to keep executing this block of code as long as this count is less than 5. Then it comes here and say, okay, this is what you want me to do after every execution. So now count is equal to 0. Is 0 less than 5? Yes. So 0 is less than 5. So this guy is true. So what happens is that it comes and executes every single thing it sees inside this block. For this particular case, what we have is just a print statement. That is how this first one is printed. Remember that our count is still 0 because we are in the first round. So once it is done printing this guy, this line 10, it goes back and then adds 1 to our count and overwrites the initial value, which is 0, with the result, which is 1, because 0 plus 1 is 1. And then the value of count is now 1 instead of 0. Then it goes for the second round. Coming into the second round, count is now 1. It checks, is it less than 5? Yes, 1 is less than 5. It comes down, executes this block, and that is how this second one is printed. Then once it is done executing, it goes back to this particular statement and then increments and overrides. This is for the second round. When it goes for the third round, our count is now 2. So it now checks, is 2, is it less than 5? Yes, 2 is less than 5. It goes there and it prints out this guy, which is what is inside this block, and that is how we got this third line. Once it is done, it goes back, increments this guy again and overrides the result. Then it goes for the fourth round. Then for the fourth round, count is now 3. So it checks, is 3 less than 5? Yes, 3 is less than 5. Then it comes and executes this, and that is how you get this number 4. Then once it is done executing it, it comes to this place and then it increments 3 and overwrites the result, and 3 plus 1 is what? 4. So our count is now holding 4. For the next round after the previous round, count is what? 4, because we have incremented 3. It checks, is 4 less than 5? 4 is less than 5, and that is how this guy is printed out, this last line. Then once it is done printing this last line, it increments 4, and 4 plus 1 is equal to 5. When it goes to the sixth round now, it checks, is 5 less than 5? No, 5 is not less than 5, so it is not going to execute this block again. It just stops. It doesn't do any other thing again. So that is how we get this output on our console. There is one other thing we could do to this guy, right? We might decide that we don't want to do this initialization inside this place. So I can remove it and say int count equal to 0. Then come to this place and just put a semicolon. It looks surprising. You probably might not have seen something like that. Now, if I run this code, it's just going to give me exactly the same thing. So let me click on run. So that's the stuff about for loop. Since we know how this our for loop works, Let me just bring this thing back to how it was before. Let me comment this guy. Let me remove this guy. And then let's go and bring our young man. So I'm going to cut it. So we've been seeing this particular for loop since we started our journey with that part. I mean, that was the first one we saw. We already discussed the meaning of var. So var is kind of a keyword for a variable, and we already know what a variable means. We talked about it in the previous chapters. We could see that this guy is the same thing as this guy, and then this guy is the same thing as this guy, right? So it's basically the same thing. And then we have a print statement here. So in this case, we are printing out my name is Emmanuel, but here something else is what happening. So before we talk about this particular for loop, I'm going to comment these guys. Instead of an int, I'm going to say string my name is equal to Emmanuel. I am also going to say string my second name is equal to Nana. What if I want to get my full name, right? Which is a combination of my name and my second name. I can say string my full name is equal to my name plus my second name. If I decide to print out my full name, let's see what it's going to give us. So it's going to give us Emmanuel and Nana. Well, there is an issue. You can see that there is no space in between Emmanuel and Nana. So maybe one thing I could do is either go here, add a space, or I come here, add a space. This is one way of joining string. I think this is called string concatenation. Due to some reasons, we couldn't get to discuss about strings concatenation when we talked about strings, right? I was thinking that I'm going to devote a particular chapter to talk about strings entirely and a lot of things you can do with them. But since this guy is coming up at this point, I think we could just take our time to brush over this particular stuff now. So this line 9 is example of what we call string concatenation, right? It's more like a way you join two strings together. Well, there's another way I can do this stuff. Look at it this way. I'm going to comment this guy, and then instead of saying my second name, I'm going to say my full name so that I have this line 11. Okay. I'm just going to remove this space. So one thing I could do is to find a way to bring in Emmanuel inside this my full name. I don't really want to do, I mean, if I copy this and put here, I don't really want to do this. I mean, this is one way I could do it, but I don't want to do it. I'm just going to go back. I want to bring this my name inside this string such that whatever my name is storing will be reflected whenever I call this my full name. And a way I could do it in that is what they call string interpolation. So when you do string interpolation, what you are doing is that you are trying to embed the data contained inside a variable. You are trying to embed it inside a string. The way to do string interpolation in that is like this. On line 6, I have my name equal to Emmanuel. I can just put $sign and then I will do my name and I'll put a space. Whatever value that my name is holding, it is going to be reflected here. In fact, if I click on run, you see Emmanuel with a space of none. And this space is this space that we have here. If I say print my full name, let me say dot to lower, let's click on run. It takes Emmanuel and then Nana, and then it gives me the result back, everything in lowercase. Well, I can say uppercase. When I use the dot to uppercase, it transforms everything here to uppercase. So I'm just going to click on run. So you can see that every single thing here is in uppercase. Let me just go back. What if I want Emmanuel in uppercase and I want Nana to just be as it is? So one thing I can do is maybe if you come here and do dot uppercase, it's going to work actually, but then this is not really cool. A better way of doing it is bringing this uppercase inside this place. We remove it there and then we say my name dot to uppercase. Once you have a dot, you are trying to access any other thing from that variable. You are going to interpolate like this. First of all, you add a curly bracket and then you add a closing curly bracket, and then that understands that you are interpolating everything, the result of the whole of this guy. If I print out my full name now, you see that Emmanuel is now in uppercase and then Nana is just as it is. The basic stuff I wanted you to know here is that you could actually bring in a variable inside a string like this, and then whenever you want to access another property of that variable, you should be interpolating like this. I mean, using these curly brackets at the start and what at the end. So I'm just going to comment these guys. I comment this guy and I comment this one too. So back to our for loop. So it is the for keyword. It says, okay, you want to execute a given block of code a given number of times. Fine, I'm cool with it. Then it says your initialization. Okay, var I equal to 0. So you're starting from 0. Fine. It sees your condition and say, okay, you want to continue executing this block of code as long as I is less than 10. Okay, fine. And then it says I plus plus. Okay, you want to be incrementing I by 1 every single time I execute your block of code. Now inside our print function, we are printing hello, and then we are embedding the result of I plus 1. So one way we could do something like this is to say final result is equal to what? I plus 1. We could now remove this guy and say dollar result, and everything is going to work out fine. In fact, let me just click on run. It's still going to give us hello 1, hello 2, hello up till 10. So it comes here, our I is 0. It checks, is our 0 less than 10? Yes, 0 is less than 10. It jumps into this block. And then it prints hello 0 plus 1, and 0 plus 1 is 1, and that is why you are seeing hello 1. Once it is done printing this guy, it executes this one before it starts the next round. When it does this particular part, then it comes back again, and this time around our I is now 1. The process continues until you get to a point whereby I is now 10, and 10 less than 10 is false, and nothing else is going to happen. So this is basically how our for loop works, right? It's used when we want to execute a given block of code or a given line of code a given number of times. That's where we use a for loop. Just like we saw earlier, we could actually take this guy outside here, put it here, and then just add a semicolon here, and everything is fine. When I click on run, everything is still going to go fine. Hello 1, blah blah blah. So that's that about our for loop. So the next one we are going to be doing is our for in loop.